A warning. This episode contains graphic descriptions of a crime scene and references suicidal ideation. Please listen with care.
A LiSTNR production.
Thousands of people cross Pheasants Nest Bridge on the Hume Highway every day, probably unaware of its haunting past. Beneath this towering structure lies a history shrouded in tragedy. Suicide, dismembered remains, mysterious deaths, and dozens of unanswered questions. In 1989, the bridge became the site of a chilling case. The untimely deaths of two 15-year-old boys, Matthew Kelly and Jaymie Egner, who were discovered inside one of the bridge's 33-metre-high pylons. Forensic investigator Esther McKay was brought in to examine the scene, a task that would forever change her life. My name's Catherine Fox. I'm a former GP, crime author, and screenwriter. I'm enthralled by forensics and have spent thousands of hours researching for books and screenplays. So I thought, why not turn my research into a podcast? Every week, you'll be joining me in discovering how forensic science is helping solve high-profile crimes in Australia and around the world.
Back in the 80s, which was when I was doing forensic work, there really wasn't a lot known about scientific work. So there wasn't much training. We didn't have laboratories to sort of send a lot of our high-level exhibits to, and it was all sort of a little bit rudimentary, and we were learning as we were going. So I started, and after a very short period of time, they put me on call. So I didn't have any formal training. And I found myself at these incredibly difficult crime scenes, really just trying to get through them with common sense. And my second call-out period, I ended up having 3 horrible incidents in a 24-hour period. I got called out at midnight to a fatal car accident, and then again at 5 a.m. to a gassing suicide in a car. And I was actually home asleep at 2 o'clock when the pager went off, and there'd been a murder of a teenage girl, and they called me over to that. So that was really memorable because it was one of the first really serious crime scenes that I had to investigate and do it on my own as well. And when I got there, my colleague who I'd gone through the academy with was on the front lawn in this scuffle with this woman, and it was really quite traumatic to see her trying to juggle this woman and try and get her off her. And I went to help her, another constable, and we were trying to pull this woman off, and she was screaming and quite hysterical. And what it turned out it was that this was the mum of the daughter who had been killed inside the house, and she'd turned up at the scene and discovered that her daughter had died, and it was the 3rd child that she'd lost in a 2-year period. She had 3 daughters. One was killed on a pedestrian crossing. Another one was killed in a car accident. This was her 3rd and only child, and she'd just been told that she'd been murdered inside this house. And as you can imagine, she was absolutely distraught, and just the first thing that she saw was this policewoman who was guarding the scene and just attacked her. So there's a lot more to these crime scenes than just, going into the scene and investigating it. So the scene in itself was absolutely horrific. The victim had been hacked to death 50-odd times with a machete, and then a stay-sharp knife had also been used to cut her wrists by her previous boyfriend. So it was a very early domestic violence example of what happens. If he wasn't going to have her, nobody was. The scene was horrible. There was a lot of blood. There was a lot of wounds. I was working alone in there. I didn't have a lot of experience. And I found it very difficult, even though I called the pathologist to come and help. And eventually someone came and sort of looked over it and said, yes, you're doing well, everything's fine. But I think that's the first time where I realised that smells were really affecting me because there was a lot of blood. And whilst I was there was helicopters overhead. They were trying to track this offender down. And they finally got him, and I later went down to the station and photographed him with all the bloodstained clothing that he had on, and he was just this weedy, insipid man. And I remember feeling disgust, which I didn't really want to feel. I'm supposed to be very neutral. And 24 hours later, I got another phone call in the middle of the night. This offender had actually died by suicide in the cells. And I had to go back and I had to do the scene with the offender. And I was, again, disgusted that he was so weak that he couldn't face what he'd done. And he'd written a note. And that's where he wrote in the note that if he couldn't have her, nobody else would. And it was just horrible. So, yeah, it sticks with you.
Because people often think that you're the victim's advocate in a way, but you are equally responsible in that scene for the person, the murderer, in his own death. You're supposed to be completely objective and almost robotic emotionally, but clearly that is just not possible. Yeah,
it's very, very difficult. And when I think about it, I mean, that was in the very early days when I started, and I found as time went on, I felt like I didn't have enough knowledge. So I asked if I could do a forensic medicine course at Sydney Uni, and they allowed me to do that. And once I'd done that course, I had a lot more knowledge about what I was actually looking at and what the causes of death were and that sort of thing. So that sort of pressure had sort of lifted. But in the early days, the pressure of being called to these very, very serious incidents, and then the detective saying, well, what's the cause of death? You know, is it suspicious? Is it not? And I'm just using really common sense and what my colleagues have helped to teach me along the way, because it wasn't until I think it was 1989 that I did a crime scene course. So the stress of that was also impacting on the seriousness of what I was actually doing. And I think that played a role in causing my eventual emotional breakdown from the PTSD and all the accumulation of the sights and scenes that I did.
Well, back in the 80s, even in medicine, there was no counselling, there was no debriefing after traumatic episodes. There was absolutely nothing. And particularly in a male-dominated profession. And it was like, if you've got a problem, go have a cup of tea. What's your problem? We're fine.
Oh, exactly. It was, and you know, when you talk about that, there was so much about that. There was all the protective clothing was too big for me because it was all for men. There was hardly any women. And I'm only, I'm quite a slight build. The gloves were too big.
I found that in surgery, that the fingers were flapping, and when they got smaller gloves, they just disappeared because there was such a need for them.
Absolutely. And I had a conversation with a GP friend of mine years and years later, and we were sort of exchanging notes about what it was like in a very male-dominated world, and also with with that sort of thing, with the fact that the gloves were too big and everything was just oversized. And she was telling this story about when she was in her training and she had to go to the morgue and do that section of her training with the pathology side of things. And when she put on the apron, they'd drawn a set of boobs on it, and she had to wear that when she was doing her training. These are the sort of things, and I'm sure, women, we just put up with it. We just shut up, get on with it, because you don't want to show that, it's affecting you or anything, but it was tough.
In terms of cases, there's one that I actually really wanted to talk to you about, and it was involving two 15-year-olds. Can you talk us through that case and how you became involved?
Yeah, that case was a really complex crime scene. One of the most complex crime scenes that I've ever examined. And unfortunately, it really was the reason why I lost my career in the end, because it was just so traumatic and a really difficult scene, dangerous. The senses, the smell was really hard there. It was difficult to navigate, difficult to work out what was going on. There was a lot of people in the scene. So basically, two boys had gone missing over the Christmas, New Year break, and were found 18 days later inside the superstructure of one of the pylons in the Pheasants Nest Bridge. And it was just after the Newcastle earthquake. So all the forensic police, because we were trained in disaster victim identification, we'd been up at Newcastle, I'd been up there doing DVI, and we were all exhausted. And it was a bad time for me. I was starting to unravel mentally, and I knew I was going to get this job. I just knew. I had like a sixth sense. So, of course, I did get it when I'd come back to duty after the Newcastle earthquake. But the Roads and Traffic Authority inspector had gone to inspect the bridge because of the earthquake to see if there was any damage. And when he got there, he saw that the manhole cover was open to actually gain access inside the bridge, which was odd. And when he got in, he could smell something really bad. And he walked quite some distance into the pylon and he could see the blowflies going in and out this access hole. So he had a bit of a look with his torch and you could see that there was two bodies 35 metres below. So it was quite a way down. So I went out there with my colleague Shane Potter. It was a stinking hot summer day. It was the 3rd of January. It did hit around the 40-degree mark. And we always wore I mean, there was nowhere for me to get changed whenever I went to these scenes, so I always had 2 sets of clothing. I had my clothes on and then I had my overalls over the top, so I had double clothing on that day and masks and gloves. And when I saw the scene, I just thought, oh my gosh, where do I start? It was just a huge scene. It was inside this bridge. And because the 2 bodies of the boys were down inside the pylon, how am I going to get to them? It wasn't accessible. I had to lay on my stomach and look through this 1 by 1 metre hole with a torch illuminating it down below, with these blowflies hitting me in the face, going in and out the hole because they were feeding off the bodies, which was horrible. And the smell was just so sickly and strong. But I also didn't really know how to photograph a scene like that, because I realised I'd probably have to use time-lapse exposure. This is before digital photography, so everything was manual, and we had to really be an expert in photography to get a good photograph. What we found inside the bridge as well was that there was some ash along the main part where when you got up inside it, it was pitch black, but there was fluorescent lightings at 10-metre intervals, and it looked like this ash had been used as like a torch just so they could see. And I found out that there was a master switch right up the other end of the bridge. So if you walked right away across from one side of the Nepean River to the other, it looked like they had gone there and turned the master switch off and then moved their way back into the southeastern pylon, and for some reason stopped there. There was a couple of cigarette butts around the hole and like a Western tight Westie shirt, checkered shirt, also sitting right by the hole. And somehow they've gone inside. So I also saw that these pieces of conduit which sit over the electrical wiring were missing. They were actually down with the bodies, sitting on top of them. So they'd gone down with them, and being a lighter weight, they floated and landed on top. So, I had to get photogrammetry out there to do 3-dimensional survey of it.
Can you just explain photogrammetry?
We don't so much use it now because technology's changed, but it's a tripod that they use with glass plates, and they triangulate a photograph one at a time. They use numbered cones and they triangulate a photograph, and then they have to change the plates. It's very laborious. Then you've got to move the tripod again and take another photograph, and then they take it back to the office and they put it in a plotting machine, and that plots basically a scale plan, so you can see everything to scale. It was a really good tool back in the day because we used to use it at fatal and culpable drive accidents and road scenes that were quite complex as well, and it could show the camber of the road and all those sort of things, and sort of mark the point of impact. So we had to do that, which is quite time-consuming, and we had to get those specialists out from Sydney. So again, there was a lot of time that we had to, wait while we waited for them to arrive. I had to get the video unit there to video it. I needed rescue squad because I needed to illuminate it properly, so they brought out some lights. And they brought out a 700-watt handheld light, which is what we used to illuminate the actual scene down below. That's how I did my time exposure photos. I put the camera on a tripod. I had someone holding my legs because it was so dangerous, and pushed the tripod over the hole and then did time exposure photographs. And the photos were absolutely amazing. They were so clear. And when I got the photos back from the photographic unit, they actually wrote, "Congratulations, this is an absolutely brilliant photo." As tragic as that is, when you're looking at it as far as, evidentiary reasons, it was a really good depiction of what we were looking at, which was able to be produced in a coroner's court.
And again, you only get one chance at this.
One chance. So if you've mucked those photos up, you've lost that forever. I also called the coroner out because I wanted him to walk through the scene. I wanted him to see what we were dealing with, which was really good. But it was so hot inside the bridge, and also a horrible sensation of the cars going over the expansion joint. So it was sort of like ba-boom, ba-boom as the cars were going over it. And that just went on and on all day. And I think it was 9 hours that I was there all up. The retrieval of the boys was horrific, absolutely horrific. And it was such a dangerous scene that we could have lost either or both of our rescue squad officers on that day. They had to abseil and free fall, because there was no points to anchor, no anchoring points. And they had to make a gantry, a specific gantry to put over the hole. And we used a man-made hauling party. It was 10 of us hauling the first operator down with his breathing apparatus on, because there was quite a lot of methane gas down there. The bodies, as they started to decompose, had started to produce methane gas, and being in such a confined space meant that it was quite dangerous and that you could not go down there unless you were able to use breathing apparatus. But when he started to descend, he actually went over backwards and started to go down head first, which was a horrible incident. And he managed to right himself. This was the first one, Kevin. And when he got down, his breathing apparatus failed. So he had to change his breathing apparatus in the dark down there, kneeling in this horrible fluid, which was alive with maggots and body fluids, because the boys had really started to deteriorate. Their bodies had really broken down. And he managed to change his set over. And then we had to send the next operator down, who was Lance Rice. He said later that he was really concerned about vomiting. He said it was so bad down there. He said he felt like he might vomit into his mask, and if he did that, he would have choked. So there was all these type of really dangerous situations for them, let alone the body fluids that they were exposed to as well, and having to search this murky water in the dark. And we had the light down, but we had to keep turning the light off because the only way we could hear them was through two-way radio. And every time they spoke, we had to turn the light off because we couldn't hear them because it had a fan that was going and it was causing too much sound. So yeah, there was so many levels to it, which were difficult.
Can you just take me back? Because a bridge I always assume is solid. It's never occurred to me that there are tunnels or access things underneath. So can you please just explain how deep beneath, before there's another platform to walk on, beneath the road, and you said 1 metre by 1 metre hole. So can you please explain the access just so we can get a better visual image?
On the southern side of the bridge, there was like a rocky outcrop that you could sort of go down on your bum, really. You had to sort of skate down it to get under the bridge. And you could stand up under there, and there was a manhole, 1 by 1 metre manhole. But to get up into that, you had to be hoisted up. You couldn't just step into it. It was quite high, like above head height. You could walk around under there. Once you got inside, it was wide enough to drive a car down it, and it was high enough to drive a car. It was underneath the roadway, which went to the first set of pylons. So there was pylons on the southern side and there was pylons on the northern side. So there's a set of 4 pylons on each side of the road, on the southbound lanes and the north-southbound lanes. There's 8 altogether. Once you started to walk along this inner cavity of the pylon, the roof got higher and higher because it was starting to go over the Nepean River, and it was on a bit of the bottom was straight, the top was on a bit of an angle, until you got to a concrete wall, and it had like a concrete doorway in it. It was quite high. It was probably about 3 vehicles high. So when you walked through that doorway, you were in a 5 by 5 metre room, and just offset off that room was another 1 by 1 metre manhole. It wasn't in the middle. It wasn't on one side. It was just offset. So that was why it was so dangerous. I mean, when Shane Potter and I first walked in there, he nearly went in it because the police officer, Jodie David, who was there, she said, "Be careful, it's really dangerous. There's a hole sort of there." And as she was pointing, he sort of stumbled and nearly went in it. We pulled him back. So that had no cover on it. Funnily enough, the pylon on the other side of the Nepean River had a concrete cover over it, so you couldn't get in. Why that one never had a cover, I'm not sure. That hole went down for about 3 to 5 metres, just as a 1 by 1 metre access way, and then it branched out to the full size of the pylon, which was 5 by 5 metres. And it was in that little part of the access where I saw the 5-fingered death grip in the concrete, where obviously one of the boys had tried to grab hold as he'd gone in. And there was a black scuff mark on there as well from a running shoe, and both the boys had black-soled running shoes on. So that's why in my determination that they were both alive when they went in, one's possibly gone in and grabbed the other one by the shorts because his shorts were slightly ripped at the waist area, and pulled the other one with him. And the second one, it was his fingernails that have scratched down the concrete. So as far as lighting in there, there was those fluorescent lighting at 10-metre intervals, and they're normally not on, but they were on when the RTA inspector got in there. So that told us that the boys had gone and turned them on and were. But inside the actual pylon, there was no lighting at all. You could not see your hand in front of you. It was pitch black.
So the water was contained. It wasn't the Nepean River. It was actually contained within that pylon.
So the Nepean River runs under the pylons, and we were hoping we could get down there through the bush and get access into the bottom of the pylon, which was all sealed, down by the water. It wasn't actually in the water, it was just beside it. But the access hole there had been completely concreted in. And to remove that, it would have interfered with the structure, the superstructure of the bridge. So it was too dangerous. So we knew we couldn't go in that way. We had to go in through the top. So if you're standing up on the road and you look over the bridge, the Nepean River is 45 metres below. So there's quite a bit of difference between the top of the road to actually being inside the superstructure of the bridge. It was 35.5 metres from inside at our vantage point where we were. So it was about sort of 5 or 10 metres in between. So the water had seeped in just from the edge of the Nepean River, and it was probably about 3 or 4, 5 inches deep in the bottom, and it was just sitting in the bottom of the bridge, just a bit of seepage.
And so when you actually had the light, could you see any remains, or were you still just looking down at water and being assaulted by the insect?
Absolutely see the full outline of the boys. I could see very, very clearly through my camera. When I had a really good zoom on it, and when I zoomed in, I could make out everything: their head, their arms, their torso, the way they were lying. I sketched them in situ from that position, sort of looking through my camera and then sketching it and making sure that I got them exactly the way they were lying, face down, face up, how their legs were bent, their arms were out. I could see the clothing that they had on. It was very, very clear, and it was quite horrific because they were so maggot infested that they were shimmering. The water was actually moving. It was like it was alive. And that's why it was really traumatic, because they were deceased, but they were moving. So it just put another level of uneasiness about it. And my photographs picked up clearly all the aspects of them. They were quite horrific photographs. They weren't something for the faint-hearted. And that was why later when I went to the coroner's court, I wrapped them in brown paper. I did, because I had them blown up quite large, and I didn't want the parents to see, because I thought that would be too traumatic for them.
These 2 15-year-old boys had been missing, and the area itself is quite creepy historically because of a series of deaths that have taken place and illegal marijuana farms and things like that supposedly in the area. And you mentioned how high it is. There have been suicides from the bridge. So what was happening with the police and the investigation until that time? Were suspicions raised in the community about what had happened to the boys?
Well, the boys, it was just before Christmas. They were on school holidays, and the boys had asked their mums if they could go down to the pothole swimming hole down at Tarmore, and they could walk to the bush from behind their homes. So they walked down to the back there, and there's been a lot of deaths at the potholes. A lot of people go down there and sort of think it's a great place to swim. They jump in and they don't surface. It's still happening now to this day. It's very black. When you go there, the water's black. You can't see. And sort of kids go down there and have a few drinks and end up swimming in the water, and some of them drown. It's horrible. And it has a dark feeling. I've been down there, and it's a dark feeling. And the Pheasants Nest area, the same. I'm quite sensitive to that type of thing, and it does make me feel quite uneasy. But the lead up to the boys being found, a lot of police were scouring the bush, walking through all that area. And one of my colleagues, Wayne Day, who'd been on over the time when I'd taken some time off, was down there every day helping the detectives and the rescue squad looking for these boys, because there was some suggestion that there was a pedophile ring operating there, and perhaps they'd been taken by this pedophile ring and were being held somewhere, or they'd been murdered in the bush and their bodies dumped, this sort of thing. So, yeah, it was pretty heavy stuff, and there was a lot of people looking for them. There was other mention of this situation where drug dealers used to exchange drugs for money under the Pheasants Nest Bridge. So the drugs would come from Melbourne and they'd stop on the northbound side, and then the drug runners who were picking it up would stop on the southbound side. They'd go under the bridge where they weren't seen by anybody and exchange the money for drugs and then go on their way. So that was being mentioned about. It was funny that people were mentioning the Pheasants Nest Bridge because they were actually inside it, but no one had actually gone and looked inside it. But there had been some searching around the area that possibly this is what could have happened to these boys. They could have stumbled across something and then, maybe murdered because they'd seen something they shouldn't have seen. So, yeah, there was a lot of stuff in the media. That the media hype was relentless, and it was horrible, and it was on the evening news every night. I mean, I was standing there watching it in my living room before the bodies were found. thinking this is just horrific. When these boys are found, this is going to be horrible. This job's going to be a really big one. And it was.
When were the family notified, do you know?
They were notified immediately. The positive identification took a little while because that's what we had to do. Yeah, clothing, fingerprints. Can we try and identify them that way? They were quite decomposed, so that was difficult. The families were told that two deceased persons had been found, but we didn't know if they were male or female at that stage because Helen Curtin, who was the sergeant in charge out there, she'd gone and she was looking after the whole incident. She was doing a wonderful job of keeping the families up to date. So she went straight to their home. She wanted them to find out from her before she heard it on the media because there was helicopters flying around. The media were relentless. Media came from Sydney. They came from everywhere. I've never seen so much media in all my life. And all my whole career, I've never seen as much media as that actual incident. And they were getting into not into the bridge, but below the bridge. They somehow got into the scene because the probationary constable just couldn't stop them. They were just pushing past. People just wanted to see it. What is it? Where are these boys? What's happened to them? And so they were told very, very soon, and the postmortems were done three days later, I think. So it wasn't long before they were positively identified, and they were able to have their burials and do their funerals and things fairly quickly, so that Lisa didn't have to wait for anything like that. But very hard.
Was DNA involved in identifying or looking at any of the evidence that you found around the hole?
Unfortunately, it wasn't. We didn't have DNA in New South Wales Police at that stage. There were some overseas jurisdictions using it at very rudimentary, like very early days. And you needed extremely good samples back then to get any results at all. And they were like minute results, if anything at all. So it would have been fantastic if we did, to be honest, because there were cigarette butts there. It would have been wonderful to have got their DNA on those cigarette butts, which is what I believed had happened. And there was a little pink lighter that had sort of been thrown in the corner and it was empty. So obviously the lighter had run out of fuel and whoever was using it had just thrown it. So DNA would have been very helpful, but unfortunately we didn't. All we could do was presumptive tests for blood and then blood grouping, and then things like analytics as far as alcohol or drugs, what was in the systems. And we did find quite a high alcohol content in the boys' system, but we had to take that evidence with caution because of the decomposition. So obviously the alcohol would increase with decomposition. So we couldn't really say whether they had been drinking alcohol or not. But the entomology was a good source of working out that the pathologist felt that they had actually died on the 18th of December or very close to there because of the infestation with the maggots and how they had developed and what we found at postmortem. So at least we had that and we could work out that they hadn't been held anywhere or gone missing. And then, finally, when we went to the coroner's court and I gave my evidence, I was in the witness box for 3 hours. And my evidence was that what I found at the scene was that they had used this torch and gone up to the other end, turned that master switch on, come back, pulled the pieces of conduit off the electrical wiring channels and sort of were poking or fiddling with those with each other like swords or something. And one boy has stumbled into the hole and grabbed the other and taken him in with him. And that explains why the conduit was down there. It explained why the 5-fingered death grip was there and the black scuff from the shoe had been caused at the top. There was nothing that I could see there that indicated there was foul play. There was in the media saying things that they'd been thrown in there, they'd been murdered, but they were alive when they went in. So that made me feel comfortable to say that they had gone in there by accident. And the coroner actually declared that it was a misadventure. So he accepted that evidence.
There's an awful lot of theories and still concerns, with the community that suspect there was foul play. How do you deal with that when you were there and you put together your findings and conclusions? How do you deal with the ongoing dispute that it was a mishap or misadventure?
I'm actually comfortable with it. I think I did such a thorough job on the day and I had my colleagues there assisting me. We had everything covered. We went over that bridge with a fine-tooth comb and the outside part of it as well. There was nothing that I felt was missed. Yes, if we had DNA, it would have probably confirmed that the boys were smoking those cigarettes. But I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable that I made the right determination and that there wasn't anything that I missed. So when I hear that, those theories, it doesn't affect me. I sort of hear them and think, well, okay. Like you said earlier, the bridge has a certain mystique to it. You know, there was a couple of murders out there where bodies were thrown over the bridge. There's been suicides there where people have gone over the bridge and died by suicide that way. There's been a lot of things happen at the bridge. So there's a lot of curiosity around it. And in fact, it's such a strange place that just after Christmas a couple of years ago, between this period of when the boys were missing and would have been in the bridge, but, you know, it's only a few years ago, I was driving through towards the bridge going south with my son, who's a musician and was playing at a gig down at the Southern Highlands. And we were in the car with some friends and the traffic was all stopped over the bridge and we're having a bit of whinge because he had to be there on time. And as I got onto the bridge, there was a man sitting on the bridge about to jump and he turned around and looked into my son's eyes and into my eyes, directly into my eyes. And I yelled at him, no. And he stopped and he had his legs over it and he stopped and he just held onto the bridge. And I drove up, parked the car, got out of the car, ran up to the bridge. And as I ran up, there was a man who was also running up and he just grabbed him and flung him off the edge and saved his life. And then he just was sobbing and sobbing. And I ended up sitting with him until the police arrived. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, why is it me that's come here and saved this man's life? And he said it was Christmas. He was lonely. He said he'd been driving around all day looking for somewhere to die. And he decided to do it on the bridge just as I drove past. And, you know, my experience with the bridge and my background with it, I can't explain that. And, you know, I went there years ago and the unfortunate tragedy of these two beautiful boys losing their life. And here there's a man who was saved. And I think me yelling no was enough to make him stop and think, oh, I won't jump.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it took my son and I a couple of days to get over it. We were actually both deeply traumatized by it. And it was good that we were there to help this young man, but it brought back a lot of things. And my son's also been quite traumatized by my policing experience because of my post-traumatic stress when he was a baby and growing up. So the two of us were, you know, really quite, it was a hard time. But yeah, anyway, that's the bridge, and the bridge just seems to attract weird things. There's often a lot of crows flying over there when I drive through it, and I often stop and put flowers at the monument there for the boys. I do it nearly every year, and I just say a prayer for them, and that's the way that I deal with it. And there's often crows sort of circling around. It's a very strange place.
Was your involvement appearing before the coroner, did that end at the crime scene, or were you then obligated to go to the post-mortem as well?
So the post-mortems happened a couple of days after, and absolutely, because I was in charge of the forensic work on that scene, I went to the post-mortems, and my colleague Shane Potter came with me, and the two of us were so stressed. I hadn't hardly slept. The night before, I'd been called out to an electrocution drowning of a 7-year-old boy in a bath. I wasn't in a good place. You know, it was a little boy again. Throughout my career, I did a lot of deaths with boys. I don't know why. They were always boys, and sometimes two boys. And driving into the city morgue, Shane and I were just so stressed. We were just talking over the top of each other the whole way there, and we weren't listening to each other at all. And then when we got there, I said to him, I'm so sorry. I haven't listened to a word you've said. I've just been talking shit the whole way. And he said, don't worry, I'm talking shit as well. He said, please don't apologise. And we got in there and we went into the dirty necropsy room, which is where they were doing these horrible postmortems, and it was pure hell. That's all the way I can describe it. Walking in through those big, you know, the plastic flap doors, and the pathologist was there. And I walked in and I walked around and I could hear those maggots crunching under my boots, and I just wanted to vomit. And I'm not really a squeamish person, but the smell was just horrible. And I was thinking, I felt weird. Like I felt like, am I going to faint? Am I going to collapse? I was getting sort of like almost lightheaded. And I started taking my photographs, and then the pathologist was looking at, certain areas of, interest, and the morgue assistant picked up the spine and held it up, and I just couldn't do that. I couldn't deal with that. It was just the most awful thing I've seen. And I looked at Shane. I said, I need to talk to you outside. And he came out. I said, I can't do it. And he said, it's okay. Just sit down. I said, I'll do the second body, but I just need to stay here. And he said, I'll do it. And he did end up doing both of them, because the pathologist wanted me to take the maggots in a container with a piece of the liver to the Department of Entomology over at LiSTNR. So I did say to Shane, do you want me to do the other postmortem? And he said, I couldn't even drive. He said, just let me keep doing this. He said, I'll just get through it. So I was unraveling. And it was funny because Shane always used to say he wasn't dealing with things a lot. And it was the first time that I was the one not dealing with it. And I felt weak. I felt like I was letting him down. And I knew how he felt, when he was saying to me, I can't deal with this. We were at a cot death once, and I wanted to go back in after we did the scene and tell the family what had actually happened, because the cot had actually failed. It wasn't just an unknown. I knew why this baby had died. It had got its neck caught when it was trying to get out of the bottom of the cot, and the pins had come away and it had got caught. So I wanted to go back and explain to the family what had actually happened. It happened as I was sitting on the front step of the house crying. He said, I can't. He said, I can't go and tell them. And I said, well, I'll go do it. So I went and told them, and I was glad I did, because they needed to know what happened so that they weren't wondering why. And then, fast forward a bit of time after that, and it was me was the one saying, I can't do it. So we were really relying on each other for support, and very, very close. Wayne and Shane and myself, all similar age, and we were very, very close at that time when we were working together, that we formed a bond that you just can't break. When we see each other now, we've been through a lot together, so we still really appreciate seeing each other, and we understand each other.
Do you think it's a trauma bond?
Yeah, it is. It is. We went through so much. And, crazy things were happening. Like one day Shane was having a bad day, and I said to him, I'll go get you a sausage roll, that'll make you feel better, because I knew he'd like them. So he was doing some hideous, statement for court, looking at awful photos and things like that. And I went and got this sausage roll, and I sat opposite him, and he started eating it. And then all of a sudden he was just looking at it. And I said, what? And he said, oh my God. I said, what? He said, it's got maggots in it. And this horrible bakery had sold me this maggot-infested sausage roll. It's so disgusting. And he'd taken a couple of bites, so he actually threw up. And I thought, why? Like, why when we're going through this horrible stuff does this have to happen? But there was things like that happening to us all the time, where we just kept getting thrust back into it. So yeah, that day at the morgue for Shane and I was very, very traumatic. And even when I got to the Department of Entomology and I gave them my, saving grace of my little container of what I had there for them to examine, they said to me, you look terrible. Are you okay? And I said, not really. And was everything not to cry, like hold it in and sort of keep going. And they had all the Christmas decorations up because it was just after Christmas. And I thought, what a horrible transition to look at. There's everyone celebrating Christmas, and here I am with this aftermath of the death of these two boys, which is just so traumatic and, so distressful. And I was trying to make sense of things, but, you've just got to get on with it and be professional and do your job.
So what happens after that? I mean, this is the thing when we see, television shows and films, it's not portrayed necessarily as glamorous, although a lot of the time it is. We don't have this image of someone who's attended a crime scene being reconfronted with all the material and the experience in preparing a police statement, in appearing before court or a coroner. It's almost as if you have to be immersed in this case for however long it takes. Is that how you felt, that you were living with these cases constantly?
Absolutely. They become part of your own DNA. They become part of you. Even with that case, some weeks later, because at that time we were doing colour photography, but we had a private lab that was actually doing all the photographs for us and printing them, and we'd send them off to the lab and we'd go pick them up and they'd come back. And my colleague Wayne came in. I was just snowed under with work, and it was a few weeks later, and he came in, he was waving this bag around. He said, I've just seen the most disgusting photos in my life. I can't believe it. I said, oh, what is it? And he said, I don't know. He said, I don't know what it is. It's just horrific. And this is a seasoned crime scene examiner. And I said, well, what does it look like? And he said, it was all grey and slimy. I don't know what it is. And he pulled one out. He was waving it around and I just lost it. I completely lost it. I just said, get that away from me. And I just said, get rid of it. Just get it away. Get it out of my sight. I don't want to see it. And I started to really unravel. And I'd never reacted like this before. And I was just rambling, get it away. And he kept saying, oh, don't be stupid. It's obviously someone's crime scene. I said, well, he said, what is it? I said, it's Pheasants Nest. And I said, I don't want to see it. And he said, you have to see it. It's part of your evidence. And I said, I don't want to look at it now. And in the end, he was quietly talking to me, trying to calm me down. And he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put them in an envelope that you can't see through, and I'll put them in the brief. And when you're feeling better and you want to have a look at them, then we'll do it together. I said, I don't care what you do with them. I said, but just get them away from me. And later I reflected, I thought, my God, like, what is happening here? This is not professional. I shouldn't be yelling at him like that. I raised my voice and later I actually realised I didn't like the way I was becoming. I didn't like myself. I was swearing a lot. I was very short with people, was nervy. I was forever jumping at noises. I wasn't sleeping. And I just started thinking about death all the time. And, as time went on, I started thinking about suicide. I thought, well, maybe that's what I should do. It's a weird thing. I mean, we do a lot of research about suicide these days, but hearing it from lived experience is really important because when you're immersed in these horrible situations all the time, you start to become quite obsessed with death and everything looks like death. Years later when I was having my first baby, my husband at the time brought this wicker basket home and it was a cradle, and normally they're dressed up with some frills, but this was just the bare cradle. And he put it in the foyer of the house and I walked in and said, get that out of here. And he said, why? And I said, it looks like a coffin. I thought that's a sign my baby will die in that if I put the baby in there. I mean, this is how your brain starts to play tricks on you.
So did you make the ultimate decision to leave, or did colleagues suggest that perhaps you had PTSD?
It was a slow journey to getting to that point because the damage was starting to be done, in the late 80s, early 90s. But it wasn't until the 90s that I started to realise that something was really wrong. So when I first had what my boss Peter Strick said was a nervous breakdown was when I had a situation over a dinner one night and I had rack of lamb on the plate and I thought it looked like the bones, the ribs of these boys. And I just lost it. I pushed it away and I started crying and I couldn't stop crying. I cried all night. I basically cried for hours and hours and hours. The next day I rang him. I said, I don't know what's happening. He said, you're having a nervous breakdown. He said, I told you we were going to have that 3 years ago. It's perfectly normal. You can either go on a couple of weeks leave and we'll just get on with it, a cup of concrete and get on with it sort of thing. He didn't say that, but it was like, just numb yourself out. Or I've got to tell the welfare and then they'll probably want to move you out of crime scene work. So I took a week leave and when I came back, I was just numb. And Shane and Wayne said that to me. They said, it's not the Esther that we remembered. You're just different. You're not the same anymore. And it really impacted on my relationships because I walked around robotically like I was numb for years and years and years so that I could do my work. So it was another 10 years later that the man that I ended up marrying said to me, like, why are you grinding your teeth in your sleep? You're having these awful nightmares. And I sort of denied it. I said, oh, no, that's nothing. But I was having a lot of horrible nightmares. And eventually I went and had some counselling. And then I ended up having some sessions with the psychologist, Dan O'Brien, who was the psychologist for New South Wales Police. And he said to me, you're the last one left who went to Pheasants Nest. The rest of the officers that attended that scene have all left. And I was quite horrified.
What did you do when you left crime scene work?
I actually wrote my books. I decided that it was a story that needed to be told, and I wrote my first book, Crime Scene, and then that was published, and I went on to the speaker circuit and found that a lot of people were suffering the same as what I had, and I sort of lifted the lid on it. I became the face of PTSD, which wasn't really great, but it was a beginning of conversation about what happens to people that work in these first responder roles. So I think I really did a great service for, opening the conversation. It's probably a bit forgotten now, but...
Actually, I heard you speak and I bought your book. So you actually did do a great service and it's not forgotten. Can I just say that now?
Thank you. I love to hear that. And I've literally had hundreds and hundreds of letters, emails from my readers, and I'm still getting them, telling me how they learnt so much from my story and how it impacted them and how helpful it was. So that really warms my heart, because if you're educating people and you're also finding a common thread, it helps people that are suffering. And from there, I started the Police Post-Trauma Support Group, which is my charity that I've been running for 20 years as a volunteer with a team of other former police, and we assist police that are in crisis. So we do peer-to-peer support. I do crisis phone calls when people are thinking about suicide. I work with the chaplain. We've done a lot of fantastic work over the years supporting police, and we're still going. I wrote my second book about one of my former colleagues because I thought it would be really good to talk about it from a male perspective, which is very difficult for men. And he did a great service for males' mental health. Unfortunately, Jeff Bernasconi's passed away now because the work he did in forensics really indelibly affected him and he never really got over it. And Forensic Investigator is a harrowing story. It makes you cry, but it also makes you understand how difficult it is in country New South Wales for these police when they're working alone, especially when they go to scenes where they know the deceased person and they've got to still put themselves aside and still finish this work. So working with him was a real blessing. And since then, both the books have been optioned for film, and I'm still working with helping police. I've worked with Police Care Australia, still working with them. We've got a national website which I've developed. I've written all the articles, made the videos for it. I monitor it, I administer it, and it's a central repository of information and service directory for police across our nation, which is a joint initiative of the National Police Memorial and the Police Federation of Australia through Proceeds of Crime. And we're really hoping to get some more funding, because I'm actually doing it as a volunteer at the moment. I was paid, but the funding's gone, we've run out. So I'm still administering it as a volunteer. It'd be really nice if we got some more funding, because I could do a lot more work with that, getting it out there so that our serving and former police have the resources to understand what burnout and what compassion fatigue is, so that they don't go on to get post-traumatic stress disorder like my era of colleagues have done.
Any of our listeners or sponsors want to donate and help police care, what can they do?
Oh, look, it would be wonderful if anyone was willing or of the mind to assist with some donations or be a major sponsor. The best way to do that would be to contact probably Scott Webber, who's the CEO of the Police Federation of Australia, or even through me direct through my email address, esther@esthermckay.com. It would mean the world if someone was interested or had, just some sort of synergy with the work that we're doing, that's interested in supporting police and helping them to have a healthier, happier, longer career, because at the moment we have retention problem. We cannot retain police in the job because they just burn out.
This has been incredible, and it's so easy to feel for you and with you. And I know reliving this is it's re-triggering and re-traumatizing again. So I'm sorry that you've had to do that, but we're also incredibly grateful for you telling your story in print and today, and the amazing work you do for people with PTSD. So Esther, thank you again for being so kind and generous, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed having the conversation, and I just want to remember, all the people that I've seen in my work, to spend a minute thinking about them and the families too, because they've been through hell, and, it's part of my life as much as it is of theirs. So, yeah, but thank you.
Crime Insiders Forensics is a LiSTNR original production. It's hosted by me, Catherine Fox. Production team includes Holly Mitchell, Link Kelly and Jade Murray. Executive producer is Dan Mullins.